Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We're continuing on Masechet Makkot, and we're on Daf Tetvav, Amud Aleph, 6 lines down from the top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a schut for the Neshama of Esther bat Naftali Tzvi Levi, as a schut for Yehuda ben Asher and Anael bat Zipporah, Yimala Hashem Kol Mishalot Libam Letova, Be'ezrat Hashem, dedicated by Menachem Kashanyan. Today's Amud is also dedicated for Refuah Shelema of Mordechai Afshin ben Shoshana Shahnaz, Shlav Refuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. Also for the Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, the full recovery Refuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. This month's learnings of the community has been graciously sponsored by the Dayan family, Cohen family, Shea families. There should be an ultimate zchut for all of their mishpachot, be'ezrat Hashem, amen. Okay, so we are in the middle of a discussion, the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan taught us in the last shiur that when you have a lav that is accompanied by an aseh, don't do a negative mitzvah that comes as a package with also a positive mitzvah accompanying it, you get malkut. The example of which was, if you become tameh, there's a mitzvah to go out of all of the machanot, depending on what level of tum'ah you have. Sarat and mesorah goes out of all the 3 machanot. Right? There's Machane Shechina, Machane Levia, Machane Israel, and mesorah goes out of all the machanot, depending on the level of tum'ah. You go far from Machane Shechina. So that's a mitzvah. I say it's a positive mitzvah. On the other hand, if you come to the mikdash, to Machane Shechina while being tameh, you get karet, you get malkut. So you see our Mishnah in Yud Gimal that says haba lemikdash tameh. If you come to the makom mikdash while being impure, you get malkut. You see from here a lav that's accompanied with an aseh, you still get malkut. Unlike a lav hanitak laseh. When you have a lav, don't do this, but if you did it, fix it. That does not get malkut, because as though Hashem says, well, if you did the lav, at least fix it. Don't get malkut, but fix it. Don't steal. If you stole, return the object. The Torah itself gives a fix. When the Torah itself gives a fix, you do the fix, you don't get lashes. Right? Don't leave over from the basar kochim until the morning. If you did, you transgressed a law from the Torah, but the fix is burn it now. You don't get malkut for doing that. Now, you wouldn't get malkut for that for a different reason also, because there's no maaseh in that, right? But theoretically, we are discussing it like that. So what is the difference? So we actually mentioned the Tosafot. The Tosafot understands the difference essentially between these two is, one of them is a standalone, and the other one is not. For instance, you can't burn the kochim if you didn't transgress the mitzvah. Right? If you didn't transgress the lav, the lotase of leaving the korban until the morning, then you can't burn the korban. Right? So that's lav hanita. You can't return an object, a stolen object, until you stole first. If you didn't steal, there's not. But over here, the aseh stands alone. If you're tameh, get out of the machaneh. You don't have to come to mikdash to have that mitzvah aseh. The mitzvah aseh stands alone, has its own identity, has its own metziut. Now, Rabbi Yochanan then retracted his psak because of a case that he had problems with, which we're going to solve that problem momentarily. But what was the problem of Rabbi Yochanan? We're going to answer it, and we'll see soon, in just a few minutes, that that's not really a problem. But the problem of Rabbi Yochanan was, we have a case of rape. Ones. If a person is ma'anes, a woman, a girl, he has a mitzvah to marry her. And he can't divorce her after marriage. So you have a mitzvah, a positive commandment to marry her, a negative commandment that after that you cannot never divorce her. You're stuck with her for your life. Right? So says,
What if she doesn't
says Rabbi Yochanan, it's not a mitzvah then. Says Rabbi Yochanan, I have a problem with this because by love of ma'anes, you don't have the same structure as malkut. You don't get malkut. And yet it is a lav and aseh. You have to marry her, and then you can't send her away. So why don't you get malkut by love of ma'anes? Therefore, he was willing to retract the entire pesach, says, apparently I made a mistake. Right? Now, Gemara is going to say, no. You're good. And this specific example of rape is actually equivalent, as we will see, to a lav hanitak la'aseh, to a lav that's followed by a fix. And therefore, you don't get malkut. Right? The problem started from the fact that we learned in a Braita, if you divorced, if you went against the mitzvah, a person that was ma'anes, he raped, and now he married her, now he divorced her against the mitzvah. He did a lav of lo yuchal l'shalecha kol yamav, he transgressed that. And says the Braita, if he's a regular Jew, not a Kohen, go back and marry her. No lashes. So says Rabbi Yochanan, scratches in your head, it's like, you see, you don't get malkut, so I'm stuck. That's the problem. Now, before we go through this, we have to understand that there are two parallel cases in Chumash for a relationship of this nature that the person gets stuck with that marriage for life. One is ma'anis, the case of rape. The other is a case of motzi shemra. What's the case of motzi shemra? Someone goes to date, right? They date, they get engaged, they get married. The day after, he comes to Bedin and says, Lo matzati lebitecha betulim. I got gypped. She was not a betula. So if they could prove that he is lying, beyond the scope of this talk right now, then he is stuck with that marriage forever. And he has to pay money also. He has to pay 100 coins to the father of this girl, and he is no longer allowed to divorce her ever again. Or ever again, right? That is...
He gets malchus also.
Yeah, and he gets malchut, of course, right? And in case of Ones, you give 50 coins, and he's also stuck. So I'll read you the two psukim for the Ones and for Motzi Shemra. You'll see the parallel right away, and you'll understand why the Gemara is trying to borrow pieces from and use it for the other one from each, because these two really go hand in hand. They are identical, almost identical parallel cases in Chumash. So it says the pasuk, and I'm reading here from the side, V'natan ha'ish hashochev imah lavi ha'na'ara 50 kasif. The rapist has to give 50 coins to the father of this little girl, Ve'lo tiyeh le'isha tachat asher inah, and he will have to marry her, of course, with the consent of the family and all that, tachat asher inah, because of what he has done. Because usually you have to understand, usually a girl like that would never get married after that, right? Now, there's a lot to talk about the psychology of this, and this not for now. There's beautiful talk to be had about this, and understanding it in our terminologies of sociology and psychology and so on. But this person is obligated, all odds even, from the family to take care of this woman forever. You hear this? Two mitzvahs. He has to marry her. That's mitzvah aseh, a positive mitzvah. He cannot divorce her afterwards, ever. Kol yamav, all of his life. A negative mitzvah, lo taseh. That's by an honest. Now look at the parallel in the case of Motzi Shemra. v'yiseru oto. When proven liar, this chatan, they would get him and they would lash him, v'yiseru oto, ve'anshu oto me'a kesef, and he would have a fine of me'a kesef to pay to the father of this nara, ki hotzi shem ra al betulat Yisrael, because he slandered a daughter of Israel. Ve'lo tiyeh leisha, here it is. Ve'lo tiyeh leisha, he has to marry her, positive mitzvah. Lo yuchal leshalecha kol yamav, he can never send her away all of his life. So mamash, almost identical words between these two scenarios. Now the Gemara deals with this question of Rabbi Yochanan, starting with Ula. Remember, for the next 20 lines, we're basically going to say, Rabbi Yochanan, you can stick to your original halacha that when you have lav shkadamo aseh, you do get lashes. You have a question from Ones, no problem. Ones is very different. That's one bubbled case for obvious reasons, which we're going to see, that's different than all the other cases of lav shektamo aseh, a lav that's preceded by an aseh, says the Gemara. Ula says, Amar Ula, this is now 9 lines down, the end of the line. Lo yomar lo tiyeh leisha be'ones. Don't tell me that I have to marry her in the case of rape. Veligmar bimotzi shemra. Learn it from Motzi Shemra. These are two parallel cases after all. Learn one from the other. Why would I learn ones from Motzi Shemra? Because ones is more chamur. So if by Motzi Shemra I have to marry her, for sure by ones I should marry her. Why is Motzi Shemra more chamur? Uma Motzi Shemra shelo asa maaseh. Motzi Shemra did not even do maaseh, right? Shelo asa maaseh. Sorry, this is the reason that ones is more chamur. That's why you should be a kal vachomer, right? Scratch that. So says the Gemara, why is ones more chamur than Motzi Shemra? Because why Motzi Shemra you didn't even do maaseh, right? You didn't do anything. You just spoke. Speech is not like maaseh. Dibur is not like maaseh. And still, yet he has to marry her. Honest, honest, who actually raped someone, he did something bad. He acted upon his thoughts in a negative way. He should be for sure stuck with her to marry her. So the Gemara says, honest, lokoshken. Im eino inyan lefanav. So therefore, we have to learn it for honest. But by honest, it says beforehand that you have to marry her. Right? So why would you need the extra limud from Motzi Shemra? In other words, I would have, even if you didn't tell me in the case of rape that I have to marry her, I would have known it from a kal vachomer from Motzi Shemra. So why are you telling me that I have to marry her? Says the Gemara, it's telling you have to marry her, not for beginning. Yeah, of course in the beginning you have to marry her. But it's coming to teach you, even if you ended up divorcing her, you're not off the hook. You have to marry her again. Right? That's why it says, Lo tiyeh leisha. You have to marry her, even if you divorced her by mistake. You have to marry her again. So if you tell me, if you divorce her, you have to marry her, that becomes like, don't steal, but if you stole, return it. Lav hanita klase. Lav hanita klase doesn't get malkut. So you're scratching your head why you don't get malkut by honest, because it is considered a lav hanita klase. It's fixed by an aseh because it's as though the Torah says, don't divorce her, but if you divorce her, marry her again. You're not off the hook. Don't steal. If you stole, return it. It's the good old lav hanita klase. That's why this, out of all the other examples, does not get malkut. But really, Rabbi Yochanan originally was correct. A lav shkdamo aseh, a lav preceded by an aseh, like going into the mikdash, you do get malkut. And this is anomaly. This is an exception. Fine. The Gemara says, very beautiful, but you can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because who says you could learn ones from mefateh? The case of, sorry, not mefate, ones from Motzi Shemra. Case of Motzi Shemra, slandering a wife that she was not betula, that's one of the highest crimes that you could find in the Torah. It's so bad that the Torah gives you all of the combination of punishments that usually don't coexist. You get lashes, you pay, you're stuck with her, all of the above. Normally speaking, do you have lashes and payment together? Never. But here you have it. Why? Because this is a high-level transgression. So therefore you cannot learn Kal Vachomer. If anything, it should be the other way around. Motzi Shemra is the Chamur, not the Kal. Correct, you didn't do action, but you did something that the Torah is extremely upset with. So says the Gemara, Vakte ones mi Motzi Shemra, lo gamir. You can't learn honest from Motzi Shemra. The Ikar lemifrach, you could ask an obvious question. Mala Motzi Shemra, shken lokeu meshalem. Motzi Shemra is a very high-level transgression. You pay, you get lashes. You don't have that by honest. Right? By honest, you only pay. You don't get lashes. Right? Ela lo yomar lo tiyeh leisha b'motzi Shemra. The one says, you know what? Actually, the other way around. Let's do the other way around. You're correct. Motzi Shemra is more chamur, so let's do Kal Vachomer the other way around. Don't say lo tiyeh leisha b'motzi Shemra. Why do you have to say that you should marry her by a Motzi Shemra? You would know it by yourself that you have to marry her. Why? From the case of honest. If by the case of rape, you tell me that I have to marry her, and the case of rape is more lenient, as you just mentioned a second ago, because you don't pay and get lashes, so it's less severe. So if by a less severe case I have to marry her, by a case of Motzi Shemra, who you get lashes and you get payment, fines, and so of course, yeah, I have to know that I have to marry her. So why in the world does the Torah have to say, marry her? Velo tiyeh leisha. I would know it from honest. So therefore, suggests the Gemara, Uma honest sheno lokeu meshalem amarachmana lo tiyeh leisha. By honest, which is less severe, the Torah says you have to marry her. Motzi Shemra, case of the slandering the wife. Lo kol shken. I would have for sure known that you have to marry her. So therefore, if I know it, why does the pasuk have to say velo tiyeh leisha, that you should marry her? It's coming to tell you that this is to teach. It's a teachable passage. You should use it for in case of me'anes, because it's not needed for Motzi Shemra itself, so give it, lend the teachable, the extra pasuk of Velo tiyeh leisha to ones, and ones in the beginning anyways it says lo tiyeh leisha, so use it for the end of it, that if you divorce, you have to remarry her again. Again, same limud, just we reversed which one you learn from which one. Mara says, okay, very nice, but you can't do that either, because I just explained to you why you can't do it, because ones has its own chumrah. Correct that Motzi Shemra has double punishment of paying and getting lashes. By the end of the day, by Motzi Shemra, you didn't do any action, it's just speech. By ones, you have a chumrah that you actually acted. And therefore, you can't learn one from the other one. The Mara says, "Umotzi Shemra me ones nami lo kamar." You can't learn that. The Ikar lemifrach, because you have an obvious question. Ma leones sheken asa maaseh, by the case of rape, he has done an action, but by case of Motzi Shemra, there has been no action. It's only speech, and therefore you can't learn one from the other. So says the Gemara, the final answer. This is an answer that is obvious. Some people at the end of Shur yesterday asked this question actually. They were mechaven to the Gemara. It's an obvious answer. You know why? When you learn the pasuk of Motzi Shemra, aren't you bothered with something very obvious? What's the scenario? A man married a woman. Tomorrow morning he comes to Bedin and says she's not a betula. Are they still married? Of course they're married. And then he is found to be a liar. And what does the Torah say? What's the directive of the Torah for this person? Velo tiyeh leisha. He should marry her. They are married. What do you mean you should marry her? I mean, if you have one place in the Chumash that something is extra, it's here. They're married. What do you want from my life? What do you mean? Go marry her. Mara says, is coming to tell you that if you divorced her, you have to marry her again. You're stuck with her. Even if by mistake or out of ignorance or out of wickedness, you divorced her, you still are stuck. You have to go back and marry her. Again and again, you have a continuous mitzvah of marrying her. Says the Gemara, why do you have to say, marry her by Motzi Shemra? You don't need to. They are married already. Ishtohi. This is his wife. Shari Ishtohi. So why does it say then, go marry her? We don't need it for Motzi Shemra. Lend it to the parallel parasha of Ones and use it for afterwards. That if you ended up divorcing the woman that you raped, you have to marry her again. You're stuck. You can't get off. And therefore, it becomes like a lav hanitak la'aseh. It becomes like a don't do that's followed by a fix of a mitzvah dasah, of a positive mitzvah. Therefore, you don't get lashes. Right? That's what it was. I said, wait a second. You told me that you don't need it by Motzi Shemra. Why don't you need it by Motzi Shemra? Maybe all it's coming to teach you is by Motzi Shemra, because this is mentioned by which parasha? By Motzi Shemra. The Torah says, if you slandered your wife, you have to marry her. Now, we know that you don't have to marry her now, you're married. So why don't we just say, it's coming to teach you that by the case of slandering your wife, you're stuck, mamash is stuck. That if you divorced her, by mistake or deliberately, you have to go marry her again. But it has nothing to do with the case of rape. How did you learn the case of rape from this? All you learn is that by the case of Motzi Shemra, of slandering your wife, if you divorced her, you have to go back and marry her. Because it says it by there. How in the world did you learn the case of rape from the case of slander? That if you divorced, you have to go marry. Right? Anybody with me? Yes? Okay. Says the Gemara, Ve'im eno inyan lefanav tenau inyan le'acharav. So, ve'ema im eno inyan lefanav de motzi shemra. Why don't we just say, says the Gemara, that this should be used internally for the case of a slander itself and only itself? That if you divorced her, tenau inyan le'acharav, that if you divorced her, you should be marrying her again. They're not lucky. And in that case, you don't get malkut because it's lav hanitak la'aseh. It's a lav that's fixed with an aseh afterwards. A negative that's fixed with a positive afterwards. Gemara says, Irachinami, you're correct. That is correct. It is lav hanitak la'aseh, and by motzi shemra, you wouldn't get lashes for it. But ve'ati onis ve'gamar mineh. But the onus is learned from this. Right? Onus is learned from this. I would add to it also, onus would definitely be learned from this because by Motzi Shemra, he didn't do a maaseh, so of course you're not going to get lashes by Motzi Shemra. Right? Of course you're not going to get lashes because there's no maaseh. But says the Gemara, how in the world are you learning onus from Motzi Shemra? In other words, pay attention to this, Rabotai. We just knocked out any learning opportunity from Ones to Motzi Shemra because we said this one has its own chumrah and that one has its own chumrah. Each one has their own stringency that does not exist by the other one. So you can't learn this from this and you can't learn this from this. So how in the world did you end up learning Ones from Motzi Shemra? You can't. There is no learnable sugya from one to another. They're apples and oranges. Yes, in the language of the pasuk, they seem to be exact parallels. But in Lamdut, in actual mechanism of learning, doesn't work because each one has, in order to learn one thing from another, they have to be equals in their status. Their status is not equal. This one has a chumrah that the other one doesn't share, and that one has a chumrah that this one doesn't share. Give me a second. Says the Gemara, none of the two regular ways of learning of Kal Vachomer or Mamatzinu, right, which are very similar things. Kal Vachomer is a logical discourse of if this is true, for sure that's true. Mamatzinu is just equals together, right? Beyond the scope of this little 2 minutes that we have left, either of them doesn't work. You could ask the obvious questions that we ask. Because Motzi Shemra doesn't have action in it. And Amar Rava, this is the final answer of the Gemara. Are you ready for this? It was always there in the pasuk. He just skipped it. It's mamash in the pasuk itself. Amar Rava, Kol yamav be'amod ve'hachzer kai. His entire life, he has a mitzvah of returning this woman. You know why? Because it says in the Chumash. What does it say? Lo yuchal l'shalecha. By both of them it says it, right? I read it to you. By the case of Ones, it says, Lo yuchal shalecha kol yamav. He can't send her away, divorce her, kol yamav. Says the Gemara. Similar thing is with the other one, with Motzei Lo yuchal l'shalecha kol yamav. Same thing. Says the Gemara, why can't he just say Lo yuchal l'shalecha? Period. What's kol yamav? What's kol yamav? Why do you have to have kol yamav? You know what the Gemara says? Because if you did it, you have to go back and marry her again. If you divorced her again, you have to marry her again and again and again. All of your life, be'amod ve'achzer kai. You have a mitzvah of returning her to your status of being your wife every day of your life. So if you divorced her 50 times, you have to go marry her 51st time. So that is equivalent of having an aseh that fixes the love. That even if you divorced her, kol yamav, you're stuck with her, right? That is lav halitak laseh, a good old fixer that don't steal. If you stole, you have to return it. It becomes equivalent of that, says the Gemara. Let's just finish this until the dot. Vechen ki ata Ravin. When Ravin came, said the same thing. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Kol yamav be'amod v'achzer. This is a full circle. It comes back to Rabbi Yochanan again, right? Kol yamav be'amor v'achzer. That this person is be'amod v'achzer. So, in other words, to sum up the entire Amud that we had, we are back to Rabbi Yochanan, who said, a lav shektamo aseh, you do get lashes on. If you have a lav that has preceding it, there is an aseh that stands alone, and also according to Ritba and Rashi, perhaps it is chronologically mentioned prior to the lav as well, that you do get malkut for. And don't ask me from the ones, the case of rape, because that is a bubble of its own, because it says Lo yuchal shalecha kol yamav, which is the kol yamav, two words at the end, is coming to tell you that even if you divorced her, you're still stuck with her to marry her again, and therefore that is like a lav hanitak laseh. It's not like a lav that was preceded by an aseh, but rather it's like a lav that is fixed with a following mitzvah aseh of positive mitzvah, and hence you don't get malkut for this, but you would get malkut for all the other scenarios of lav shekedamo aseh. And we're going to go on now. We've finished with this. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll have one more interesting piece of the Gemara following this in this subject as well. B'ezrat Hashem for the days to come. Zaku Baruch.